It started like any other day. I had just come home from work, expecting to see the usual. My wife, Claire, in the kitchen, preparing dinner, the sound of our kids playing in the background. But when I walked into the house, the air felt wrong. Claire wasn't there, and the silence was louder than it should have been. I hung my coat up and checked the time, 7:30 p.m. I didn't think much of it. Maybe she was out running errands, or the kids had dragged her somewhere. But then I saw the text messages. Her phone was on the kitchen counter. The screen flashed, almost like it was waiting for me to look at it. I shouldn't have checked. I knew it. But something in me, a nagging voice, pushed me to do it. The first message was from her sister, Sarah. It was innocuous enough. Hey, just checking in on you. You good? But it was the next message that made my stomach drop. It was from a name I didn't recognize. Can't wait to see you tonight. I'll be thinking about you all day. My heart froze. I reread the message twice. I didn't want to believe what I was reading. I had never suspected Claire of anything like this before. We were happy, weren't we? Sure, there were rough patches, but we were strong. Or so I thought. I checked the contact. Mark, it read. I didn't know any Mark. Not a friend, not a coworker, nothing. And then my mind raced. Could it be? I waited for Claire to come home. When she finally walked in an hour later, she looked surprised to see me sitting on the couch, just staring at her phone. What's wrong? She asked, her voice tight. I couldn't hold it back. Who's Mark? Her face drained of color. For a moment, she didn't say anything. She just stood there, her eyes wide, her mouth opening and closing like she was trying to find the words. You weren't supposed to find out this way, she whispered, almost too quietly for me to hear. And in that moment, everything changed. I felt the blood drain from my face as Claire stood there, her hands nervously wringing together. My mind raced, trying to piece things together, but the reality of what she was saying still hadn't hit me. You've been seeing someone else? I asked, my voice low, barely audible. I couldn't even bring myself to say it out loud. The words felt too heavy. Claire hesitated before nodding slowly, her eyes filled with guilt. It's not what you think, she started, her voice faltering as if she were searching for some way to make this less painful. Not what I think, I repeated, my voice rising slightly. What am I supposed to think when I find a message like that? You tell me, Claire. What am I supposed to think? She took a step forward, her eyes now brimming with tears. I never meant for it to happen this way. It's just, Mark and I, we were close, we've always been close. It started innocently enough. Started? I couldn't contain the bitterness that dripped from my words. How long has this been going on, Claire? How many times have you? She flinched, her face crumpling in pain. A year. We've been seeing each other for a year. A year? My mind exploded in disbelief. A year, and I had no idea? She'd been hiding this from me for an entire year, and all I had to show for it was confusion and rage. I don't know what to say, Claire whispered, the tears falling freely now. I never wanted to hurt you. But Mark, we connected in a way I didn't expect. I never meant to betray you. I don't even know how it happened. Her words hit me like a slap. The betrayal was so raw, so unthinkable. I couldn't process it. You've been sneaking around behind my back for a year, Claire. I exploded, standing up, my fists clenched. And now you want me to believe this is all some big misunderstanding? That you never meant to hurt me? You knew exactly what you were doing, Claire. She took a step back, tears streaming down her face. I never wanted to hurt you, I swear. I love you. I do. But I don't know. I don't know how to fix this. Her voice cracked as she said it. You've already destroyed everything, Claire, I snapped. How do you think I feel? You betrayed me with someone I don't even know. And now you expect me to just, what? Understand? Move on from this? Like it was just some mistake? She didn't answer right away. Instead, she looked at me with such desperation that I almost wanted to soften. Almost. But then the reality of the situation hit me again. I need some time to think, I muttered, the words coming out colder than I intended. I need to figure out what to do. I'm not sure I can. Before I could finish, Claire collapsed onto the couch, her sobs echoing through the room. I couldn't move, couldn't comfort her. I was too angry, too hurt to even try. All I could do was stare at the woman I had loved, the woman I thought I knew, and wonder how this had all fallen apart. I walked to the door and paused. "I'll be at my brother's place," I said, my voice low, barely audible. "Don't call me. Don't come after me." With that, I stepped out, slamming the door behind me. As I drove away, the overwhelming feeling of betrayal gnawed at me. I felt like a stranger in my own life. How could Claire, my wife of 6 years, have done this to me? How could she have kept this from me for so long? I didn't know how long I drove that night. The miles blurred together as my thoughts raced, anger and confusion mixing in a storm inside my chest. My brother's house was only a few blocks away, but it felt like the longest drive of my life. I couldn't stop replaying the conversation in my head, the sound of Claire's voice, the guilt in her eyes, the hollow pit in my stomach that kept growing the longer I thought about it. I pulled into my brother's driveway and sat there for a moment, hands gripping the steering wheel as I took a deep breath. I didn't even know what I was supposed to feel anymore. My world, my marriage, everything had just been shattered. And now, I was left trying to pick up the pieces. I wasn't sure what I was looking for. Solace, maybe, or a way to sort through the mess in my head. The door to my brother's house opened before I even got a chance to knock. Brian, my older brother, looked at me with a mix of concern and frustration. He must have seen the pain written all over my face. "Come on in," he said, stepping aside. What the hell happened? I didn't say anything at first. I just walked past him, heading straight for the kitchen. I needed something to take the edge off, anything. As I opened the fridge, I grabbed a beer, unscrewed the cap, and took a long pull. The coldness was a temporary distraction, but it helped. A little. Brian followed me, leaning against the counter. "You okay? Do I look okay?" I shot back, voice harsh. "She's been cheating on me, Brian. For a year. A damn year." The words felt surreal coming out of my mouth, but as soon as I said them, it hit me all over again. Claire, the woman I trusted, the woman I loved, had been lying to me. Brian's face softened. He knew better than anyone how much I loved her. We talked about our marriage more times than I could count. "Damn, bro," he muttered. "I don't know what to say." "I don't even know what to do," I replied, the anger giving way to exhaustion. "She says she loves me, but how the hell does that even matter now? She destroyed everything. I can't look at her the same way. Hell, I don't even know if I can look at myself the same way." Brian stood up straight, his expression turning serious. "You need to decide what comes next. You can't just keep spiraling like this. Claire's going to want to fix things, but you need to figure out if you even want to try." That was the problem. I didn't know what I wanted. The thought of staying with Claire, of somehow forgiving her for everything, felt impossible. But the thought of leaving her, of ending our life together, that hurt in a way I couldn't describe. "I don't know if I can forgive her, Brian," I admitted. "I don't know if I can look at her and not see Mark standing there with her." My brother's gaze hardened. "Then you make her pay. Not for revenge, but for closure, for both of you. You're not doing this for her. You're doing it for yourself." A chill ran down my spine as I considered what Brian was saying. "What are you talking about?" Brian stepped closer, lowering his voice. "You want her to feel what you're feeling. You want her to understand the weight of what she's done. The anger, the betrayal. It needs an outlet. And I think I know just how to help you with that." I stared at him, unsure of what he was suggesting. "What do you mean?" He smirked, but there was a dark edge to it. "I've got some ideas. Things we can do to make sure she understands what she's lost. And it's not about getting back at her in some petty way. It's about her seeing exactly what she's done to you, to your life. And once she sees it, you'll finally have the power to decide what happens next." It was a tempting thought. The idea of making Claire see the consequences of her actions, of holding her accountable in a way that made her feel the pain I was feeling, was a feeling that burned deep inside me. But it also scared me. Because once that bridge was crossed, once that plan was set into motion, there would be no going back. I finished my beer, staring into the emptiness of the bottle. What do I need to do? The plan started to take shape in my mind, slowly at first, then faster, like a speeding train I couldn't stop. Brian had a way of making everything sound simple. In his world, revenge wasn't some long-winded, complicated scheme. It was direct. And he made me feel like I deserved to take control of the situation, to turn the tables on Claire in a way she'd never see coming. The first thing we did was track down Mark. Brian had his ways, connections that stretched further than I could have imagined. He didn't tell me how he found him, just that we'd meet him the next day, and that we needed to make it clear to Mark exactly what his actions had set into motion. That morning, as I prepared to meet Mark, my stomach churned. It wasn't just anger anymore. It was a dark, growing sense of satisfaction. Claire had given herself to him. She had lied to me for a year. But now, I had the power to make her face the consequences of her actions. Brian drove me to the bar where Mark was meeting us. He didn't know we were coming, and that was the point. I wanted him to be caught off guard, to feel the weight of the situation before he even had a chance to speak. When we walked in, Mark was sitting at a table in the back, a beer in his hand, looking casual and completely unaware. As we approached, I could see the surprise in his eyes. The second his gaze locked on mine, I saw it. The guilt. It flashed for a split second. Then he quickly covered it up with a forced smile. He stood up as we reached the table, extending his hand. "Hey, man, didn't know you were coming," he said, his voice trying too hard to sound friendly. Brian didn't wait for me to respond. "You might want to take a seat, Mark," he said, his voice cold. "We need to talk." Mark looked at him, then at me, before slowly sitting back down. His eyes darted between us, clearly trying to figure out what the hell was going on. I didn't waste time. "You've been with my wife, Mark, for a year. Did you think I wouldn't find out?" His face blanched. He opened his mouth to say something, but no words came out. He glanced nervously around the room, as though trying to find an escape route. But there was no escape. "Not now. I didn't mean for it to go this far," he stammered, his voice shaky. "I didn't." "Stop." I cut him off, my voice as cold as ice. "You didn't mean for it to go this far? You knew exactly what you were doing. You knew she was married. You knew exactly who you were betraying. So don't feed me that nonsense." Mark's eyes dropped to the table. "I never wanted to hurt you, man. I swear." The words felt empty. They meant nothing. "I want you to understand something," I said, leaning in, my voice dropping to a low growl. "You've taken something from me that I can't get back, and you're going to feel the consequences of that." Mark's eyes flicked up to meet mine, but there was no defiance in them anymore. Only fear. "You're going to tell Claire the truth," I continued, the words hanging in the air like a promise. "Everything. You'll make sure she knows exactly how far you're willing to go to destroy our marriage. You'll call her, meet with her, and you'll tell her what you've been doing behind my back. She'll hear it from you, and only you. You're going to make her feel what I feel. The betrayal, the disgust, the heartbreak." Mark looked like he was about to protest, but Brian stepped in, his voice sharp. "If you don't do it, if you even think about running away, you won't get away so easily. I'll make sure everyone knows what you've been doing behind Claire's back. Your reputation? It won't just be destroyed, Mark. It'll be obliterated." I could see it on Mark's face. He knew we meant business. He looked from Brian to me, weighing his options. Finally, with a reluctant nod, he agreed. "Fine. I'll tell her. I'll do it," he muttered. The satisfaction that washed over me felt almost too sweet, but it was hollow. It didn't undo what had been done, didn't erase the betrayal, but at least, for now, Claire would have to face the truth. I wasn't the only one who had been kept in the dark. As we left the bar, Brian patted me on the back. "You did good," he said. "Now we wait." And wait we did. The next few days felt like an eternity. I knew Claire was going to hear from Mark soon, and when she did, everything would change. I didn't know if that change would lead to reconciliation, but I wasn't sure I even cared anymore. The truth would be out, and there would be no going back. The night Mark made his call to Claire, I could barely sleep. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, my mind spiraling with every possible outcome of what she might do when she learned the truth. Would she break down, begging for forgiveness? Or would she deny everything, try to make it seem like I was the crazy one? But there was something else gnawing at me, a deeper, darker thought I hadn't fully acknowledged until that moment. What would I do if she begged me to take her back? Could I ever forgive her? Could I look at her the same way again? The phone call came in the early morning hours, just as I had anticipated. I heard her voice before I even saw the screen light up. Claire. I didn't pick up right away. I let it ring, each passing second pulling me deeper into my own mess of emotions. The phone rang a second time. I sighed and answered it. David. Claire's voice was strained, like she'd been crying for hours. David, I need to talk to you. Please. I leaned against the headboard, feeling numb. I know everything, Claire, I said quietly, my voice barely above a whisper. Her silence on the other end was deafening. Then I heard the tremble in her voice when she spoke. You talked to Mark. He told you. Yeah, I replied. He told me everything. So now, I want to hear it from you. I want to hear why you did it. I could practically hear her heart pounding through the phone, her breath hitching. I don't know. It just happened. He was always there, David. I felt like you were slipping away from me, and Mark understood me. He made me feel seen. The words felt like daggers. I had given her everything. I had supported her, loved her, built a life with her, and this is what I got in return. It wasn't even about her being with Mark anymore. It was the betrayal of my trust, the destruction of everything we had built together. I gave you everything, Claire, I whispered, and you chose him. You chose to throw away our life for a year of lies. You thought you could keep it hidden forever, and now here we are. I never meant for it to hurt you this much, she said, her voice cracking. I never wanted to destroy us. I thought. You thought what, Claire? You thought I wouldn't find out? You thought you could have your cake and eat it too, and I'd just keep pretending everything was fine? She fell silent again, and in that silence, I could feel the weight of the moment settle over us. It was too late for apologies, too late for anything that might have saved us. I need you to leave, I said, the words coming out of me more coldly than I had ever expected. You need to leave, Claire. I can't do this anymore. I can't live in a lie. Her sobs echoed through the phone. David, please don't say that. Please don't. I'm not doing this for you, I cut in. I'm doing this for me. I need to start over. I need space to breathe. So, please, take your things and leave. There was a long pause before she spoke again, and when she did, her voice was barely audible. I don't know what to say. I don't know how to fix this. You don't, I replied coldly. There's no fixing this, Claire. Not now. I ended the call and sat there in silence, the phone in my hand feeling like a weight I couldn't shake off. I felt nothing. It was like I had just walked away from a ghost, a life I had known for years, and yet, nothing about it felt real anymore. It felt like a dream, like something that was never truly mine. The next few days were a blur of empty rooms, broken conversations, and packing. Claire had already taken some of her things, but I couldn't bring myself to care. I wasn't angry anymore. I was just empty, numb. It was like she had stripped away every emotion I had for her, leaving only the hollow echo of what we used to be. She came to the house that evening to pick up the last of her things. Her face was pale, her eyes red from crying, but there was no apology in her eyes, no explanation that could fix what had happened. I didn't say much when she walked in. I just watched her as she gathered her belongings, the silence between us thick with years of unspoken words. The woman I had loved, the woman I had built my life around, was now a stranger to me. I'll be gone soon, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I nodded. Goodbye, Claire. She stopped for a moment, and I saw her look at me as though she were waiting for something. Some sign that I still cared, that there was some hope left. But there wasn't. Not anymore. She left, and I stood in the middle of the living room, the emptiness of the house settling around me. It was over. For real this time. I was done. It had been a week since Claire left. Every day felt like an eternity, but it was also oddly peaceful. The house, once filled with the noise of children and the hum of daily life, was now just a shell. Empty rooms, quiet corners, and my own thoughts echoing off the walls. I didn't miss Claire. Not in the way I thought I would. I didn't miss her touch, her voice, or the way she used to laugh at stupid jokes. I missed the idea of her. The woman I had thought I knew, the life we had built, was all gone now. I'd spent the week in a haze, trying to figure out what came next. Divorce? Yeah, that was inevitable. But there was something else I hadn't fully addressed yet. What about the revenge? The anger still simmered in my chest, but now, it didn't feel as urgent. It felt like it was slowly eating away at me, like a fire that wasn't raging anymore but was still burning deep inside. I couldn't keep going this way. I had to make a decision. I spent the next few days talking to a lawyer. The process of divorce seemed cold, clinical, like I was crossing off items on a list rather than dealing with the wreckage of my life. I knew what needed to be done. I needed to get my life back, to rebuild everything that Claire had destroyed. But the question lingered in the back of my mind. Was this all worth it? Was the revenge, the sense of satisfaction I'd gotten from making Claire feel the weight of what she'd done, really going to make me feel whole again? The lawyer confirmed what I already knew, dividing assets, splitting up the house, and sorting out custody of the kids. It was all straightforward, but as I signed the papers, it felt like my world was slipping further and further away. Then came the hardest part, the kids. They were old enough to understand what was happening. Bryce, my son, was 12. He had noticed the tension between Claire and me long before everything exploded. Tessa, my 9-year-old, was more perceptive than I gave her credit for. They both knew something was wrong, even if they didn't know the full story. I sat them down at the kitchen table. Their eyes were full of questions, full of confusion, and my heart ached for them. I didn't want to tear apart their world. I didn't want them to think I was the bad guy. But I had to be honest with them. I owed them that much. Kids, I started, my voice trembling slightly despite my best efforts to stay composed. I know things have been really hard lately, and I need you both to know that what's happening between your mom and me is not your fault. We both love you more than anything in this world. But sometimes, people change, and that's what's happened with your mom and me. Bryce looked at me, his eyes wide and searching, while Tessa's brow furrowed in confusion. What do you mean, Dad? Is Mom coming back? She asked, her small voice breaking my heart. No, sweetheart, I replied softly. Mom isn't coming back. She and I, well, we're not going to be together anymore. We've decided to get a divorce. Bryce was quiet for a long time, his face a mix of disbelief and frustration. Finally, he asked the question I'd been dreading. Why, Dad? Why didn't you just fix it? I closed my eyes for a moment, the weight of his question pressing down on me. Sometimes, even when you try your hardest to fix things, it's too late, I said, my voice barely a whisper. And I don't want you kids to see us hurting each other anymore. I could feel the tears welling up, but I fought them back. I had to be strong for them. They needed to know that even though their world was changing, they were still loved, still supported, and that nothing could take away that love. After I finished talking to them, we just sat there, the silence in the room deafening. My heart was breaking for my kids. They didn't deserve any of this. And even though I'd made the decision to move forward, to leave Claire behind, the guilt still gnawed at me. The next few days were a blur. Claire and I communicated through lawyers, and she moved her things out of the house. The kids stayed with me, and the house felt quieter without Claire's presence. But the anger, the bitterness, it was still there. It didn't go away just because I filed the papers, just because I made the decision to move on. And that was when I realized I wasn't done with this yet. I wasn't done with her. The weeks after the divorce papers were filed felt like a blur. Life had become a series of routines, conversations with lawyers, late-night phone calls with my brother, and trying to keep things as normal as possible for Bryce and Tessa. But I couldn't ignore the simmering resentment that still gnawed at me. Claire was gone, but in many ways, she still had a hold on me. The anger, the betrayal, it wasn't something I could just shake off. It lingered, bubbling under the surface, and I needed a way to release it. I knew that I was fooling myself if I thought the anger would magically disappear. It wasn't just about revenge anymore. It was about reclaiming my sense of control. I needed closure. I needed Claire to understand how deeply she had hurt me. That's when I decided. It wasn't about destroying her life or trying to hurt her the way she had hurt me. It was about making her see the consequences of her actions, forcing her to face everything she had done to me. And this time, I would make sure she didn't get away with the lies the manipulation, and the deceit. I set the plan in motion. Brian had helped me with everything up to this point, tracking down Mark, forcing him to confess to Claire. But now, I needed to take it a step further. I was going to meet Claire, not to reconcile, not to beg her to come back, but to make her understand the gravity of what she had done. I called her that evening. It had been weeks since we'd spoken, since she'd left. I didn't even know what to expect, but I knew it was time to confront her once and for all. The phone rang once, twice, before she finally picked up. "David," her voice sounded tired, but not surprised. She must have known this was coming. "I didn't think you'd call." "I need to talk to you," I said, my voice steady, but the anger still bubbling beneath the surface. "Meet me tomorrow. I have something to say." "David, I don't know if—" "No. Tomorrow. I'll be at the park at 10 a.m. I'll be waiting." There was a long silence before she finally responded. "Okay." The next morning, I found myself standing in the same park where Claire and I had spent so many afternoons with the kids. It was quiet, peaceful. Everything that our life used to be before everything shattered. I stood by the bench, my hands in my pockets, waiting. She arrived right on time, her steps slow and deliberate as she approached me. Her eyes were bloodshot, like she hadn't slept in days. Her hair, once perfectly styled, now hung loosely around her face. But it didn't matter. What mattered was that she was here. She was going to face what she had done. Claire stopped a few feet away from me, her hands nervously clutching her purse. "David, what is this about?" Her voice was shaky, but she tried to sound strong. I didn't answer right away. I just watched her. For the first time in a long while, I saw her not as the woman I once loved, but as the person who had broken my heart. "You told me you loved me, Claire," I began, my voice low but steady. "You told me that we could get through anything, that nothing would ever tear us apart. But then you went behind my back. You betrayed me with Mark. And not just once, but for a year." Her breath caught in her throat, and I saw her flinch. But I didn't stop. I couldn't stop. "You've taken so much from me, Claire," I continued, my words sharp. "You took my trust, my love, my family. And you don't even seem to understand what that means. You don't understand how much damage you've done. You think you can just walk away from all this, but you can't. You can't just erase the past. You can't just erase the hurt." Claire took a step forward, her voice breaking as she spoke. "David, I'm sorry. I never meant to hurt you. You have to know that." I shook my head, my anger flaring up again. "Sorry doesn't fix anything. Sorry doesn't make up for the lies, the cheating, the secret life you were living behind my back. You've destroyed everything we had, and now you want to say you're sorry?" She stepped back, her face pale as the weight of my words seemed to sink in. "David, please," she whispered. "I didn't know what I was doing. I never wanted to hurt you like this. I just got lost. I was done listening. You don't get to make excuses anymore, Claire. You don't get to hide behind getting lost or not knowing. You made choices. You made a decision to hurt me, and now you have to live with that." For a long moment, we just stood there, the silence thick and uncomfortable. I could see the tears welling up in her eyes, but I didn't care. I didn't care about her remorse. I didn't care about the apology that was probably coming next. This was about me. This was about me taking back the control she had stolen from me. Finally, I spoke again. "I don't know if I'll ever forgive you, and I don't know if I'll ever be able to look at you the same way again. But I want you to understand this. What you've done doesn't just affect me. It affects our kids, our family. You've shattered everything, and it's not something that can be fixed with a couple of words." Claire nodded slowly, the weight of my words hitting her like a brick wall. She looked down at the ground, unable to meet my gaze. I know I've ruined everything, and I'm sorry." I didn't respond. There was nothing left to say. I had said my piece. The power had shifted back to me. As I turned to walk away, I heard her call out softly, "David, are you really done with me?" I didn't look back. "Yeah, Claire, I am." The days that followed our conversation in the park felt surreal. Claire's departure had already shattered so much. But now that the final words had been spoken, it was as if a heavy curtain had fallen. I had given her the truth, forced her to see the pain she had caused, and yet I still felt empty. What was I really expecting? That she would change? That somehow things would go back to normal? It wasn't until I picked up my kids from school the next day that I realized the full extent of how deep this wound had cut. Tessa, normally bubbly and carefree, was unusually quiet in the back seat. Bryce, the older one, kept his gaze fixed out the window, his arms crossed tightly over his chest. The tension between us was palpable, and I could feel it settling in, like a heavy weight we all couldn't escape. "Dad," Bryce spoke up suddenly, his voice thick with something I couldn't quite place. "When's Mom coming back?" The question hit me like a ton of bricks. I had been prepared for it, but hearing it out loud, hearing the confusion and hurt in his voice, brought it all crashing down. "She's not coming back, Bryce," I replied quietly. She and I are going to be apart for good." His silence spoke volumes. He didn't argue, didn't fight it, but the hurt in his eyes told me everything. It wasn't just the end of Claire and me. It was the end of the family he had known. A family that was now torn apart by betrayal and lies. That night, as I tucked them both into bed, I felt a hollow ache in my chest. I could only hope that, in time, they would come to understand why things had to happen this way. But for now, all I could offer them was my presence. I could be there for them. But what about me? It's funny how much can change in a short amount of time. A month had passed since Claire left, and while the shock of everything still hadn't worn off, I was beginning to see glimmers of what my life could be like moving forward. It wasn't easy, though. There were days when the weight of it all felt unbearable. The loneliness was crushing at times, and I couldn't help but feel a pang of regret. But something else was emerging within me, a sense of strength. I wasn't the same person who had stood by helplessly while Claire's affair tore us apart. I had taken control of my own life. I had made the hard choices, and now I was moving forward. There was no going back. The divorce wasn't finalized yet, but I knew it was inevitable. The lawyers were working through the paperwork, dividing the assets, and handling the logistics. Claire had already moved into a small apartment in the city. The kids were still adjusting to the split, but they were resilient. They were adapting, and I was adapting with them. I started focusing on my own healing. I threw myself into work, taking on more freelance projects than I had in a long time. It was a way to keep my mind occupied, to escape the loneliness. But it also reminded me of something I hadn't realized I was missing: passion. I had let my career slide while I focused on Claire and the family. But now, it was just me, and that felt good. I also started going to the gym again, something I hadn't done in months. It felt good to push myself physically, to feel like I was regaining control over my body, my mind, and my life. I was becoming stronger, both physically and emotionally. I could feel myself slowly turning the corner, even though it was still hard. A couple of months later, Claire and I met once more. This time, it wasn't to confront the betrayal or to demand answers. It was about closure. She had called me one evening, asking if we could meet to talk about the final steps in the divorce. I agreed, and we met at a small cafe on the edge of town. It was a neutral ground, somewhere in between the life we had shared and the lives we were now moving toward. Claire looked tired. Her face had softened, and there was something different in her eyes. It wasn't guilt or regret. It was a quiet acceptance. "I know things have been hard for you," she said as we sat down, "and I know I've hurt you in ways that can't be fixed. But I need to tell you that I'm sorry, David, for everything." Her apology felt different this time. It wasn't a desperate plea for forgiveness. It wasn't her trying to justify her actions or shift the blame. It was an acknowledgement of the pain she had caused, and I could see it in the way she spoke. "I know," I replied, my voice steady. "I can't forget what happened, but I think I've come to terms with it. I've let go of the anger." Claire's eyes searched mine, as if trying to gauge whether I was being honest. And for a moment, I saw a flicker of the woman I had once loved. But then, just as quickly, that flicker was gone. "I want you to know," I continued, my voice soft, "that I've forgiven you. But forgiveness doesn't mean that we can go back. It doesn't mean that everything is okay. It just means that I'm letting go of the pain." She nodded, her face betraying no emotion. "I understand," she whispered. For the first time in months, I didn't feel the overwhelming weight of betrayal hanging over me. It was as if a huge burden had lifted from my shoulders. I wasn't completely healed, and I knew it would take time. But for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was finally free. I'll always care about you, Claire, I said, standing up to leave. But we're done, and we need to move on. For our kids. For ourselves. Claire didn't say anything as I turned to walk away. But I knew that this was the last chapter of our story. It was time to close the door and walk away. As I stepped out of the cafe, I felt the weight of the past fall away. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't broken anymore. I was free. The road ahead wouldn't be easy, but it would be mine to walk.